All good. Rock and rolling. Yeah. 48 more hours, brother. It's crazy. It's just crazy. Anyway, good. Good. So, I will take any questions anybody's got.
So it's starting to feel real now? You were just saying, 48 hours.
Yeah, it's starting to feel real. I mean, it felt real like for 18 months.
Sure.
Because everything was prepped for getting here to Spike.
Right.
We had the 1 year where we had to kind of sit back on our hands and do the FTV2 thing, which was great, but it wasn't the ideal where we were going to go. So, yeah, you start to see, where I'm sitting at my desk, you start to see the teases, you start to see the new graphics packages, you start to see the formats for the show, and then it all suddenly starts to go, whoa, it's getting really real. So, yeah, it feels real. It's cool because it's right in our backyard.
Sure.
The offices are 5 minutes from here, and this is where I train completely on a regular basis, and it's just like, it's almost kind of surreal that it's all happening right here. But it's great because you're not on a flight, you're not staying in a hotel room, you're sleeping in your own bed, so it's pretty cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you, it kind of seems obvious with 2 title fights on Thursday that you guys decided to come out with guns blazing. What was the thought behind loading up the first show?
Just you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, and you got the current pinnacle coming in the box, 2 best featherweights in the world, and you got Chandler Hahn. And I think Chandler's performance against the Ed was just, I still think it's the best MMA fight I've ever seen. And Hahn is looking unbelievable in his last few fights for us. I mean, he brought, so few guys were able to go from 85 to 70 or 70 to 55 or even 55 to 35, bring the power with them because they lose so much when they make the cut. But this guy, as an Olympian and a world-class athlete, he did it. He brought all that power with him. And it's just been, he's looked unreal. And stylistically, I mean, judo versus wrestling, what's Mike's takedown it's going to look like against a guy like Rick Hahn with that kind of balance and those kind of hips, and he's going to force them both to stand, and they both got one-punch knockout power. I mean, it's just crazy fights. To say nothing of Babalu, he had a fight in a set fight versus Zoe, which I think has got to be a great fight. So it's it'll be fun. I mean, it's a great way to kick off, and I think when you've got Curran on a show and you've got Chandler on a show, you've got 2 guys who exemplify kind of what we're all about. Using that tournament structure to go from unknown to top of the world. So it should knock on wood. It should be a good kickoff.
How you doing on ticket sales?
Good, really good. I mean the Brent Centers. Have you ever been in the Brent Center? Yeah, it's scaled for about 4,000. And I think that's where we'll be. So it looks really good. And we got so many VIPs coming from Spike and Viacom and all that kind of stuff. So it should look great. And it sets up beautifully too, because there's not a bad seat in the house. Even in the less expensive seats, you're still right up on top of the cage or the ramp, whatever they've got in there. So it should be good.
You talked about never get a second chance to make a first impression. At the end of the day, you can put everything in place, but it's up to the fighters to perform. Is that how you're feeling? So there's a certain point, like you wave your hands of it, you can't do anything more.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I mean, I think the guys know what's at stake. I mean, you got 2 world title fights, and you got 3 fights where guys are either going to win and move on or lose and go home. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, we do everything we can possibly do, and you put the fights, and then you just got to wait and see what happens. But boy, I would be shocked given these guys. I mean, given these guys and what they've done. I mean, history has an amazing way of repeating itself. And if you look at Curran's history, Pitbull and Hahn and Chandler and Bob, these guys bring the fights. I mean, just so my anticipation is really high, and you and I'll see when they get into the cage when it rings.
For these first couple cards that are so important, what was the process in really developing the cards? I mean, it was a little different than usual. Were you sitting in on meetings with Spike executives? I mean, Sam Kaplan usually handles things, and I've heard Zach Light, maybe was he doing the undercard, or how did was it pretty extensive to figure out these first 2-3 cards?
I've got a great situation on my hands because I've got partners who are true partners. So many people talk about partnerships, and they say this TV group are our partners, but they're a distribution vehicle in most instances. In our instance, they're true partners. So I sat down with Kevin McKay and I sat down with the whole team at Spike, and I laid out what we were taking over these first 4 shows and what we're thinking about coming out of the box with. And that's what you get when you have guys who are sitting on the board, who are vested in the company, who own a big stake. They're looking at it and going, who can we promote, how do we want to unveil this? We want to come out big, but we want week number 2 to be awesome with King Mo and Askren Amasu, and we want week 3 and week 4, and we want world title fights. And you just literally sat down with a format and just picked and kind of moved pieces and changed things, and ultimately came out with this. But it's honestly a partnership. Like, it's not like, oh, they're our partner and people talk about it. They're legitimately our partner. So we sit down with them and they know the space. I mean, since '05, these guys have been marketing and promoting and advertising MMA, so they know it. They know what's going to work, what isn't going to work, what we should come out of the box with, how we should not come too strong out of the box so we can keep great stuff for the subsequent weeks. So they just, they really get it. I mean, I'm talking to people who I mentioned, I mentioned Joker, or I mentioned any of the other fights on the show, and they're like, oh yeah, he was great, and I remember when he fought this guy and that guy. They're like us sitting down and talking about MMA. So it's a whole different scenario than what you typically experience in sports television.
You mentioned King Mo. You guys, I mean, you seem to have pretty big plans for King Mo, TNA, Bellator, and but you're putting them through the tournament. I mean, you could lose. It's MMA. I mean, you could lose next week.
Yep. That's the magic of it, brother. It's a real tournament.
Is there any guys you, really like to see in the finale, or you really don't worry too much about that?
You know what? I used to think about what I would like to see, and then what you find is what you would like to see or what you think you would like to see gives rise to something that ends up being better than what you had anticipated. And if that's not confusing enough, let me give you an example. There's a guy rolling around in that cage over there behind you named Pat Curran. And we signed Roger Huerta, and it was going to be Alvarez Huerta, and I had Alvarez Huerta in my head. And then Pat Curran beat Roger Huerta. And it was the beginning of Pat Curran going from being a Midwest unknown fighter to being one of the best fighters in all of MMA. So at the time I looked at it and went, oh, wow, we had this big commitment behind Huerta, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And then it gives rise to a guy like this. So I stopped thinking about what the future could hold, and I just kind of put all my trust into the fact that this tournament is going to give rise to the best fighters. They're the ones that are going to get through. And then you get Pat Curran. All the guys in the world at 145 pounds started throwing punches. Jose Aldo and Pat Curran would be the last 2 guys standing, and everybody else at 45 would be scattered on the mat and the ground and the cement. So it just, that's where it goes. So it would be great if Mo wins, or Babalu wins, or Zoe, or Seth, or whoever else ends up pulling off the victories.
You were talking about the TV partnership, which answered a lot of my question, but is there still, you still feel some pressure that you've got, this event has to really perform ratings-wise for Spike in particular?
Not really. I've had 1,000 conversations like that with Kevin Kay, who had Spike, and we're both saying pretty much the same thing, is that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Spike and Viacom are heavily invested in MMA, and now they're heavily invested in Bellator and have been for almost 2 years. So, the numbers will be what the numbers will be. What we're looking for is growth. We're looking to start out someplace and then end up 11, 12 weeks from now as we built it all out. The tournament's gone from 8 to 4 to 2 to 1, and just to continue to see growth. And if we can get that, we're on the right track.
Thanks.
With the folding of Strikeforce recently, and the partnerships that you mentioned as far as Bellator's business model expanding, what can the casual Bellator fan expect? The fan that's seen you bring rise to these young fighters, and now we're starting to see more bigger names come in. What can the Bellator fan expect from the Bellator fan from the start? Can you expect from these partnerships? How do you think the business is going to grow by the end of the year?
The growth curve over the last probably 6 months has been pretty substantial. Simultaneously as we're growing, from the early stages, it was the IFL, Elite XC, and Bodog, and Affliction, and they all left, and then it was WEC, and then they left, and then it was Strikeforce. And even when we first got into it, we still pride when I first started building up the business model. So you saw everybody else leave the space, and I just think that was due to a variety of factors. Some of them were faulty business modeling, but I think the growth curve will continue. Look, we've got the backing right now of an entertainment giant conglomerate in Viacom, who really understands this space, knows how to market it, knows how to monetize it, knows how to sell to sponsors. So that gives rise to a lot of opportunity. It gives rise to a lot of opportunity in our television show and sponsorship for fighters we want to sign. If big names become available, the next King Mo that comes out into the marketplace, we can make a move on that fighter. I've got the backing and the substance behind it to make it work. So we're not, the long answer to a short question, we're not going to divorce ourselves from what made us who we are, which is the Pat Currans and the Michael Chandlers and the Hans, guys that we built up. Patricio Pitbull. I got an email from a buddy of mine who I knew in the boxing business. This is 3 years ago, and I've told this story many times. All the emails, it had a link to a video, and it just said, "Dude, check this out." Period. And it was a video of Patricio Pitbull fighting in little teeny shows in Brazil, and it was like I called Sam Kaplan in the middle of the night, and I was like, "Dude, I don't care how you have to get on a plane, but go sign this guy." So the development process will stay who we are, and then when the Ben, Killaby Saunders comes up, the King Mola Walls comes up, and the Babalus come up, we'll sign them, and it won't be kind of a one track going down.
Now, is there any concern with some of the other promotions that you mentioned, like the Elite XCs, the earlier promotions that in the restaurant industry we used to say they blew up too fast, they expanded too fast? Is there concern about Bellator within the ranks that we gotta expand intelligently, and is that definitely one of the issues that you're dealing with?
And that's where the marathon, not a sprint statement comes from, is that we've always approached it. We've never looked to go out in a bidding war with somebody if it didn't make sense. Hector Lombard came up toward the end of this deal, and Hector Lombard's a dominant middleweight, I still think, and some people yell at me for saying it, I still think he'll end up being UFC champion at 185. But when we got the offer from the UFC, we took a look at it and we're like, we can't monetize that. Hector's a great name, he knocks people out, people are going to want to watch him on television and on pay-per-view in short order, but we can't monetize that deal. So we've always, the business model has been what's driven a lot of the decision making. It hasn't been, well, I bet if we did this and I bet if we did that, then we could conceptually do this. It was based on real modeling, Excel spreadsheets that we looked at and tried to figure out how do we turn this into a profit center for the company, or at least a cash flow break even that could eventually build to it. So, that philosophy is not going to change, and we're cash flow positive now. Unfortunately for a lot of the folks who've tried, and I know a lot of the people at the different companies, I think we're the second group in the space to ever be able to say that, other than the UFC. So, and that's where it's got to start. You've got to, on a monthly basis, you've got to earn a little bit more than what you spend, and then you can put yourself in a position where you can, continue to grow. But it's incremental. It's not, it's not from here to here. It's,
So we can't expect like a massive signing of fighters after the Strikeforce.
No, and I think you can count on the fact the UFC is going to be, the guys that they can monetize and turn into draws, they're going to sign quickly, and then there's going to be guys who maybe haven't gotten there yet or have had their day that they're going to let go. And we'll look, just like we look in when a guy's contract comes up anywhere, and see who we conceptually could sign and if they'd make sense in our format. Our format's tough. I mean, there's no getting to the end goal in this format. There's no big Kimbo Slice-esque super fight. Right. It just, if you're not good enough to compete with some of the best guys in the world at 45 or 55, you're going to get blown out in the first or second round. So.
We know Josh Barnett's free agent. You have interest in him. Is there any other names on your radar from that deal?
We've not really at this point. You never know. You and I have talked a lot of times. I've never really taken the flag and planted it in the ground and said we're never going to do X or we're. But if there aren't guys that I look at off that roster and go, oh, we've got to have him. We want to make the move, or we're gonna. I know the next question is, have you talked to Dixie? And is there, based on the articles, and it's like, not really. No, Mo's our guy on that front, and that's where we're putting all our money and our effort. And I think he can be the best 205er in the world, or surely one of the top 2 or 3 at the very height of his game, and he crosses over to the other domain really nicely, and there's no facade about it. It's all real, and it's right there in front of you. So.
Speaking of you ruling the corner, you're saying, I mean, not definitively, but saying you're not making a play for him right now.
Yeah, look, our focus right now is our focus right now is the next 3 months. But everything that we're doing right now is focused on that. It hasn't been a topic of conversation in our meetings with the staff, the core team, and everybody's here. So, Josh is a great character, and he's had some great fights, but he's not really on our radar.
How do you guys find such great talent in Brazil and Russia, and how are ratings going in Russia?
Ratings are going great in Russia. Ratings are going shockingly well on Sport de Interativo out of Brazil. I mean, 2 to 3 million viewers per show, which is great. The Brazilians have, of late, embraced televised MMA in a huge way. The UFC is doing really well there as well. So, it's just, Sam Kaplan and Zach Light and I and our talent development team don't sleep, and we email each other at 3 o'clock in the morning. And we've got what we call a developmental process. So, and that developmental process is we can go to a young guy who maybe 2-3 fights away from being at that elevated level, but Sam and Zach look at him and they go, this kid has got wicked potential, but he needs 3 more fights before he's even close to getting on the track to start to build toward a tournament. And then we put him in a 6-fight deal over a year. So the kid's fighting once every month and a half to 2 months, and you get, instead of being 3-0, suddenly you're 9-0. And then you're really in the mix, and you've seen a lot of different styles. So it's part and parcel having that. Being able to take guys that are young that we see a lot of potential in and move them super quickly. I mean, you saw that with Chandler when we first signed him. We moved him super quick and put him in a lot of fights right out of the box, and then he was like, I'm ready for the tournament. So,
with the sporting aspect, where Bellator really is like a true MMA sport, I believe, especially with recent decisions that UFC has made, giving like Chael Sonnen a title shot and losses at a lower weight class. Do you think that kind of solidifies that you're onto something for sure, and it maybe is the way to keep MMA pure and looked at as a true sport instead of a Twitter battle to get shots and big fights?
Yeah, you know, there's no question it's a different philosophy. You know what I mean? It's a different way of looking at it. They, you know, I've always felt like part of the decline in boxing from a ratings perspective and a sponsorship support perspective has been due to the subjectivity. Why is that guy getting a shot at the title? Why is that he's 20? You know, he's 24-0 in the Midwest circuit. Nobody's ever heard of him, and suddenly he's in. Or a guy that we know that there are 4 or 5 guys that can fight at a higher level than him are getting bypassed, and he's getting his shot. Or, in some instances, just somebody who has an incredible ability to generate a lot of media interest gets their shot, where 5 or 6 guys who might deserve that shot get passed over. So, and I don't think we figured anything out. I mean, I think the World Cup works that way, the Olympic Games work that way, baseball, football, which we're all watching like crazy right now, basketball, hockey, which just settled their labor dispute, they all work exactly the same way. They start out here and they end up here. And, you know, the guys who run the NFL might want to see, you know, the Dolphins play the Giants every year, NFC versus AFC, because they're huge markets. But they don't get to decide that. The teams have to play, and if the Giants get eliminated or the Dolphins aren't there, a major market team, it goes on. So it's just, we're just following a format that I always thought was perfect for every sport I've ever watched, but was never applied to combat sports.
Not only can fans follow it, but I'm sure some of the fighters really appreciate that, where the destiny is in their own hands. You've got to make them more motivated. Guys that are really hungry, that want to be world champion, and they know they can get there based on what they do, as opposed to, you know, guys who are getting frustrated over at UFC, like Machida, Dan Henderson, and get jumped over.
It doesn't matter what language you speak. Doesn't matter if you're married to a supermodel. Doesn't matter if you got really cool hair like you or hair like me. It's all irrelevant. All that matters is that cage door locks and you win or you lose. And that's what sports all about. I mean, that's what makes March Madness so cool every year when I watch basketball. It's like suddenly that unknown school with 7,200 students. It's a liberal arts school out of Ohio somewhere. It's got a basketball team, and you're like, oh my God, look at these guys are progressing into the round of 8. I mean, I've always felt like that's the way sports should work. It should not be a guy in a shiny suit sitting behind a desk going, you know, he's an incredible talker and people are going to pay attention. I bet we can get 40,000 more buys out of him. It should just be about if you win.
In your personal opinion, did you see Strikeforce closing shop as a good thing or a bad thing for you, and then overall in general for the MMA industry?
It's a great question. I think, I'm a student of sports, and obviously more of a student of combat sports than I am just sports in general, but I pay attention to things that happen. And if you watch what was the WWF and turned into the WWE, their greatest growth curve, their exponential explosion in terms of growth happened when there was a WCW. So, and it wasn't, and no matter what Vince said publicly in the back rooms in his offices in Connecticut, he was going, this is awesome. Our audience share is growing and there's competition and it's getting us bigger and our valuation is larger and people are paying more attention to the sport. So I've got to think, I think from a competition perspective, if you've got at least 2, it gives an option, especially when you've got 2 that are so different in terms of their format. You know, like we're pure sports competition, and they're a matchmaking format. And I'm not going to stand here and talk about why I think one is bad or one is good, but they're very distinct. It's not like we're doing what they're doing, and it sure isn't like they're doing what we're doing. So I think that, you know, that's a good dynamic to have in play. Is there room for a third, or would a third have made that more hyper-competitive? hard to tell. I mean, you know, I knew just based on watching history, when the acquisition happened to Pride, I was like, I used to love watching Pride, but they're done.
Yeah.
And, and you could see those acquisitions occurring, and you could tell, okay, the WEC is ultimately going to be shut down, and they're going to take some of the most charismatic stars and build them into the UFC. So, I don't know. I mean, I think 2 is a good number, but if another one shows up and they've got great product and they've got good support from television, I don't know that that's going to be a bad thing either. The other thing it does, I don't mean to go like too deep into this, but the other thing that it does is 3 or 4 years ago, when there were so many players in the space that had television deals, and Versus was in play, and all these different players, and CBS had shows, etc., what you have is a developmental process at the lower levels from a gym perspective where guys could look at it and go, well, I could go to the Elite XC or the WEC or Strikeforce, there's this Bellator group coming up on Deportes, and there's always a UFC, and there were a lot of options. So what it did is it caused world-class wrestlers coming out of Olympic trials or the national championships, the NCAA is going, this is my career path. That's gotten smaller. So you don't have that same kind of real breadth of potential stars coming up that we did 3 years ago when guys could look at it and go, man, I got option after option. So I think that optionality actually helps the sport. I think it gives us more of a pool to pull from of young fighters who go, hey, I don't have to work selling shoes or work construction or utilize my psychology degree or whatever it is, and they can just fight. And that's going to give rise to a faster evolution of the game.
Let me piggyback a little bit on that. What about kickboxing? Like with Spike, I think they're done with K1 probably bit, but they're saying maybe they're looking at Glory. You know, maybe it is better to have 2 MMA, and MMA, Bellator only being on Spike, but are you okay with them doing a kickboxing thing, and how do you think, it's different enough that it's, you know, it's not MMA, but I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the old, I mean, these have been K1 shows from years ago, but some of those shows were awesome. I mean, just epic, and they're you know, if you're a fan of knockouts and head kicks, you know, the Marco Pro Cop stuff, and something that's great TV. So I think there's room for it. I mean, it's more difficult as our sport evolves to envision Glory guys or K1 guys transitioning into MMA. Because it's you know, it's not like it was where, you know, it's Hoist. Oh my God, he's going to submit everybody. Not really anymore. And the kickboxing guys aren't going to necessarily come in to be able to just take over. But if they can develop the other aspects of their game, I mean, it's a very different, you know, it's a much different sport.
But you don't mind Spike going that route if they choose to? I mean, it means they're into the fight business, and it just solidifies that.
Yeah, we've had, I mean, Kevin and I have had a lot of discussions about it, and I'm a fan of it. I think they're much different sports. They're going to draw a somewhat different audience, but there's also going to be crossover. And then you're going to be able to pull some of the guys from Glory into Bellator at some point if that's the route that they go, or whatever kickboxing organization they might align with. But it's a different genre, and it's not an MMA organization, and it's exciting. It's good television.
You mentioned the WWE example, how they bought WCW, they bought ECW, and it was everybody's all under them. And then after a few years came TNA. But the problem that TNA encountered was the talent, that everybody wanted to go to the WWE. So what things are in place for Bellator to avoid guys coming in, you guys coming in, hey, come to Bellator, and we're like, oh, well, there's the UFC up north, up here, you know. What's in place to stop that from happening? Because that is happening now with some of the guys that you've brought up through your tournament format.
Just religious attention to detail in terms of going out and securing talent. A recruiting system that's as good as any that I've ever seen in college football or anything else. I get notifications and emails and videos from my guys, just ridiculously early, on guys that are still 2-3 fights away from being at the stage where they could probably be on the radar screen anywhere. And it's just because I've got talent development guys who have fought and know the game. They recognize that we've got to build out the next Mike Chandler, the next Pat Curran. And seeing guys like a Curran who was fighting at 45 pounds in between 40 and 55 and going, this kid could be unbelievable, let's give him a shot. So it's about that recruiting, and it's about the developmental process I was telling you about. Is that when we see a guy at 3-0, we're willing to commit the time, energy, and money to get him 5-6 fights over a year to get him up to 8 or 9-0, and then to be able to look at him subjectively and go, okay, this kid could get into the deep water right now, where he's still obviously 4 or 5 fights away, where that same 4 or 5 fights in the UFC could take you a couple of years to get. You know, we can speed up that process pretty dramatically.
Two-part question here. Just one.